Welcome and aloha. Thanks for joining us at ThinkTech Hawaii. Time for responsible change. We have the good fortune to have with us today Rebekah Ratliff, a longtime insurance claims industry expert nationally and internationally, and mediator, arbitrator with JAMS and independently, and David Larson, recent media past chair of the American Bar Association section of dispute resolution, innovator for the New York Online Dispute Resolution Program, professor at Mitchell Hamlin University. Rebekah, David, welcome.
Thank you, Chuck. Good evening.
So who knows where we'll end up, but where we thought we might start off today is clearly freedom of thought, expression, and learning, including and maybe even especially in our schools, is under direct, severe attack. Rebekah, you're in Georgia. How is that impacting you and people you know?
Well, we're concerned about other states that have already signed into law that you cannot teach Black history. There's just, to quote a cartoon character, there's evil afoot. There's, the attempt to wipe out history, in particular Black history, is very disturbing. There are lots, of course, everyone knows that Georgia is one of the states that implemented voter suppression laws after, I'm losing time now, after the 2016, after 2020, I guess, or before 2020, maybe. It's so hard to keep up, but we're already in 2023. But, you can't make anybody comfortable that's trying to do the right thing. So you can't serve food or water in voter lines. You can't, so now the education fight is on to make sure that history, Black history specifically, is not wiped from, the learning in schools. And it is really a big concern.
David, from your perspective?
Well, I think the education environment is a place where you can get people excited. We're coming out of a pandemic, and teachers did the best we could. That's not our tradition of teaching. ACT scores dropped to the lowest level they did in 30 years. Math scores went down for the first time since the math test was ever administered. So people are concerned about schools, and they want to get engaged. Well, now that people are paying attention to schools, if you have an agenda that you want people to pay attention to, bring it over to the schools, because people are looking at the schools. And if you can stir something up there, you'll have an audience. And I think we're seeing that happening nationally. And certainly we're seeing it happen in Florida, where Governor DeSantis introduced the Stop the Woke Act, Stop Wrongs to Our Kids and Employees Act. And and it came into light just recently because the College Board has an AP test for African American Studies, and under threats that test would be prohibited under the legislation, the College Board revised that course, and that's created a lot of controversy whether they should have done it. One interesting thing about that revision by the College Board is that the College Board makes a lot of money actually running these AP tests. According to New York Times, their revenue last year was about $1 billion, and almost half of that, $490 million, was running these AP courses. So they need to sell their AP courses. And if there's a threat that their customers aren't going to be able to use them and thus buy them, it's not surprising that you'd see them make this kind of a change. But then, I think it's appropriate to say, should you be kowtowing to legislation and calls like this? Can't you rise above that? And I think that's one of the controversies we're living through right now.
Mm-hmm. Are the courts the appropriate place to resolve it? Are there political environments that are? Some of each?
Well, it did already move to the courts. So, there was an action brought to challenge it under the First Amendment. The district court judge in Florida did enjoin it. I don't think the appeal's been resolved. It was appealed to the 11th Circuit. So, yeah, it actually did go to the courts. You look at the statute, it was, it's cleverly, carefully drafted. I mean, what it prohibits espousing, promoting, advancing, inculcating, and compelling students to believe several different things. To believe that anybody, because of their race, bears responsibility for actions committed in the past by members of the same race, and that by any person, by virtue of their race, bears personal responsibility for or must feel guilt, anguish, or other psychological distress because of acts committed by somebody else of the same race in the past. So it says that what's prohibited again is espousing, promoting, advancing, inculcating, and compelling. And then it comes back and says, but on the other hand, you can teach these things as long as it's purely objective. Well, that's not a very clear lie. At what point are you espousing, and what point are you being objective? I think that's intentionally a vague line. And by drawing an intentional vague line, what you do is that you basically force people to self-censor, that you don't know where the line is. I'm not sure exactly how much I can say or what I can say. I don't know what's going to be considered objective, so I just won't touch it. And that's probably the goal, have people not talk about it at all. And I think that the way it was drafted, it's at least right now accomplishing that goal.
Well, and that's a great insight because of two things. One, in some states, maybe Florida, it essentially deputizes students and parents to say, if we're uncomfortable with it, then it's wrong.
That's right.
And secondly, some states, maybe including Florida, impose penalties that include incarceration, loss of livelihood, fines, financial penalties. And we've already seen with abortion laws that do things like that, like in Texas, it seriously intimidates the professional judgment of people who are longtime experts in the area, for example, in reproductive health care. What impact do you think this is going to have on teachers and schools?
Well, my understanding is, teachers in Florida can lose their jobs. And is it at all levels? I think at all levels, which is a very scary thought because, as David has said, the wording is so vague, broad, that you have to be careful about what you say if you're in a position to teach the truth. You can go to jail, you can lose your job. And so it's really disturbing. And other states are planning to enact similar laws. So I just think it's so unfortunate. I don't even know what to say because it is a clear attempt to just wipe out the teaching and the learning of really the atrocities that the United States was part of. My grandfather used to say, and he didn't make it up, but if you don't know your history, you're doomed to repeat it. And what we're seeing is a lot of things happen out there. We were talking before the show started a little bit, Chuck and I, about how different things feel since COVID. And what's concerning is that there are so many things that cause people to feel unstable now, that this is just another area in which our society has become unstable.
Well, I think it's seen as a political opportunity. You want to get people's attention. Talk about their kids, and I'll tell you that your kids are in trouble, that your kids are under threat. And if I want to get you, if I want to rally you to my cause, to my side, I'm gonna paint a picture that's really threatening and frightening. So I'm going to talk about how your students are being inculcated with CRT, with critical race theory. And in kindergarten, that's really happening. That's what I'm going to tell you. Those are pretty sophisticated concepts for kindergartners, and it's not happening.
Right.
It's the curriculum is being misrepresented in an inflammatory way, and critical race theory isn't even being presented in any accurate way. It's a Marxist socialist equivalent, and it's a brainwashing effort. And I don't know, this sounds maybe too simplistic, but when I think about critical race theory, I try and draw analogies. So I was thinking about mortality. So mortality is a fact. It's interesting to think about how a recognition of our own mortality affects how we order our society. And for example, what rules and policies that we're going to create. So we know we're not going to be around forever. So what do we think about the environment? Well, some people might think that, well, I'm not going to be around forever. So I don't really care about the environment. So I don't have the kids, and I just don't worry about it. Or maybe I don't love my kids, but I'm not gonna worry about clean air, clean water. I'm going to worry about the money that I'm making. Other people might say that, I'm only here for a brief period. There'll be generations after me. We really need to legislate environmental protections. So that's kind of an interesting idea. Take a fact and think about how it's ordered our society. I think that's all we're doing with critical race theory. It's like, I don't care how liberal or conservative you are. You can't deny the fact that there was slavery in this country. That's just a fact. You can argue about what are the repercussions, what's the lasting legacy of that, but it's a fact. Okay, just like our mortality is a fact. So what we're doing with critical race theory is we're saying, okay, here's a fact. Let's explore how that reality has shaped the way that we've created our institutions and our policies and our laws. That's what we're going to do. Let's look at it closely. Think about it. Think about what the legacy of that is in this country. And maybe there are things that have been built or constructed, sometimes intentionally, maybe not always intentionally, but they're having a continuing impact. And let's explore it and let's think about it. I don't think in any kind of an educational environment that should be as threatening as it's being positioned. That's what we should do in education, that we should explore ideas like that. So it's really discouraging that now it's become a kind of political sword.
And that tells us also that while on the one hand, there may be ways to substantiate those things that are clearly facts and part of our history. Redlining to exclude Blacks from housing and its financing, that's a fact.
Yeah.
Similarly in healthcare, similarly in educational opportunities, similarly in employment opportunities, compensation and benefits, and across the board. All of those things are objectively demonstrable, verifiable facts.
That's right.
But on the other hand, you've got the punitive provisions and access to them opened up to people with not only subjective emotional points of view, but potentially very biased points of view that are aligned with exactly the problems that generated those racist policies.
That's right. In the first place. That's right. And that institutionalized them.
Yeah, I think one of the challenges always is the response that I didn't do it. I didn't do it.
Yes.
It's not my fault. Well, that's kind of not the point. The point is that you still are benefiting from what happened before.
That's right.
In the Twin Cities here, we have Minneapolis and St. Paul, about exactly 10 miles apart. And an interstate highway was built 94, was extended to link the two downtowns. Well, the link could have been positioned differently. It was positioned right through a Black neighborhood. And all the businesses, all the homes, everything were erased, eviscerated. I don't think that the Black community has completely recovered from that economically. It just stripped them of everything they had built. So there's discussions now about what do we do about that. And of course, we're getting the idea that, well, I wasn't here when that was built. I don't even know what you're talking about. Why should I have any responsibility for that? Even though the other neighborhoods weren't affected, they continued to grow and people continued to benefit and prosper when this neighborhood was erased. And I think people have to come to an understanding that even though you weren't there and you didn't decide where the highway would go, you benefited from that. And maybe there's something should be done about that.
Yeah, there are so many stories. I mean, recently I became aware of the story of the city of Oscarville here in Georgia. Because when you were talking, David, I was thinking about Black Wall Street, and you, Chuck, your points are well taken about the what happened factually, and Black Wall Street in Tulsa, which recently, was televised in a documentary, and so many, so much information in history came to light. They're digging up graves over there from people who were just buried really in mass graves. But Oscarville was a town here in the Atlanta, Georgia area near Beaufort. And there was a lie, like we've heard many times in history. The town was destroyed really based on a lie, and Lake Lanier was built over that town. So they destroyed the town and they built a lake over it. So there are houses and there's debris in Lake Lanier that sometimes impales people when they fall there. It seems like every summer tragedies happen at Lake Lanier. And what they're finding is that sometimes people fall out of a boat and they get impaled on the different debris, house pitched roofs and things that are under the water because Lake Lanier was built over the town of Oscarville, Georgia. Now, have you ever heard that story?
No.
How unbelievable is that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you're right. That's why we need some of these history courses, because none of those stories have been told and the history is not known. So, yeah, that's a great example as to why we need these courses.
Yeah. Yeah. Really disturbing. What are your thoughts about the monuments? Because I know now for maybe 2-3 years we've been talking about the monuments coming down, and I have mixed feelings. We know that Congressman John Lewis, before he passed away, they wanted to change the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma to be named after him, and he said, "No, don't do that. That would be erasing history. Let it remain Edmund Pettus Bridge, but put something on the bridge, a plaque or something that tells the significance of that bridge. Don't name it after me." And I thought that was an amazing point because for some, the answer is to tear down, all of the monuments from the Civil War, Virginia and other places. But that's a very interesting thought, not to do that, but to mark them with the real history. If you're going to tell the truth, that might be a solution versus taking them down, or if you take them down, put them in a museum. What are your thoughts around that?
Well, context is critical. I think part of the problem is that the monuments are standing with no story and no context. So I think at a minimum, if you decide you're going to retain them, that you need to tell that story. And it needs to be in kind of a very permanent kind of plaque or fixture that when you see the monument, when you approach it, it's pretty inevitable that you're going to read that narrative. So I think that kind of the condition of keeping the monuments is that you agree that you're going to put some context on them.
Well, and maybe that clues us to an approach that's blended, but also has movement to it. So maybe you do rename it the John Lewis Bridge, but you provide plaque signs, information that's readily available and easily accessible that indicate the history of what it was and how it has evolved from that to what it is. Because history maybe needs to show us a couple of things. What were the tragedies that happened that we need to learn from not to repeat? but what are the choices and movement that we have made to show that we can do that effectively, successfully, and more equitably?
There's the word. Yeah, more equitably.
And bringing up that word, we know that in Florida, they're literally attacking approaches to build diversity, equity, and inclusion. That's,
I referenced the kind of the vagueness and ambiguity in the statute. Again, it was intentional because it forces people to self-censure, but it also was intentional because it provides some cover. It's that this isn't such a terrible statute because we have a clause in there saying we're not banning any discussion about it. You can have a discussion about it as long as it's purely objective. But again, that line between advancing, espousing, and objective just is not a clear line. So given the consequences you might suffer, people say, I can't risk it. I can't try to walk that line. I'm not going to talk about it.
well, and that points to the other insight that you folks both indicated earlier, is that although there's that waffle language, in fact, the policies that are being put in place are prohibitive policies. They prohibit teaching of or even reference to certain events and aspects and perspectives of history. They prohibit certain authors and books. And that's, together with the punitive provisions in those laws, have combined to seriously intimidate teachers, school boards, students, parents, and to weaponize the biases that generated the need for that corrective behavior, for that more inclusive history in the first place. How do we regain that momentum, that direction?
Shows like this.
I was going to say we have to keep talking, but but how do what's the call to action? I mean, we have to, shows like this to keep the topic alive. Yeah,
I think, and it is incumbent on us to write letters to the editor, to make ourselves open to interviews on television, radio, and streaming and podcast. I think we need to do that. We need to step up and say that I'm available, and it's going to take my time, take some preparation, but we can't let everything go unanswered. There has to be a response.
And I think we want to recognize that essential to the diversity and the equity is the inclusion. And exactly what these laws and these prohibitive punitive policies are intended to do is to promote and expand exclusion. So that's where the battle may be fought. Where do you see the most likely source of success in resisting that exclusionary anti-diversity?
Well, maybe it's the venue of last resort. Maybe it's the courts. Maybe it's the First Amendment. To the degree that we're prohibiting discussion about important matters in public institutions like schools, that is a First Amendment issue. And so I certainly think that the courts are a place where this is going to end up. There's been a concerted movement the last few years by conservatives gain control of school boards, saying that, okay, this is the way we can do this. We're just going to stack the school boards, and then we're going to vote the policies we want. So I think getting people involved at that local level that understand this is happening, understand that these curricula are going to be created in ways your kids are not going to be exposed to a diversity of ideas. Have you thought about running for school board to get people involved at the local level?
that's an excellent point, because often, even in our political elections, people forget that the local elections are just as important for decision making up the flagpole. As you move into your city elections, your state and federal, that's something that I I will admit, unfortunately, I think minorities miss a lot is the importance of making sure that the wrong people don't infiltrate the local systems, because it affects everything that happens, outward. Yeah, that's a great point.
Well, and we've got a Supreme Court that is generally expected to shortly dispose of affirmative action in a broad sense. They've already gotten rid of reproductive health right protections in the Constitution. They've expanded gun rights far beyond what anything, even historically at the time of the Second Amendment, might have conceived. Is there going to be continued movement toward politicization of the courts, recognizing that in many states judges are elected?
Well, I think the answer's got to be yes, because people say, "Hey, it works." Look what we were able to do. We wanted to change abortion, we couldn't do it in Congress, so we supported a candidate who promised to do this, to stack the court with conservatives, and he did it. And they have now taken away the national right to abortion. So, oh my God, it works. So now let's even get more active when it comes to pushing our candidates, because we can change the world by doing that. So I think if anything, people are energized to think about, wow, let's get as many conservatives on the bench as we can, because look what we can accomplish.
Where do you think might be the sources and the forces that might give us hope that the erosion of these critical rights, including freedom of thought and expression, might start to generate greater levels of protection?
I'm just speculating now, but I said that people respond when you talk about their kids, benefits to your kids and threats to your kids. Talking about the danger to your kids, to their global perspectives and viewpoints and ability to understand other cultures in the world, to take out this variety of ideas out of school does not prepare your kids to deal in a global environment, which they will be living in their lifetime more than we are now. And they're going to have to interact with people from around the world during their lifetime, and they need to prepare to do that. So stop thinking about the threats to their kids in terms of how they're going to be indoctrinated into just pure patriotism. And in fact, think about the threat to your kid not being prepared to deal in a complex, diverse world. Because if they can't, that doesn't bode well for their own lives or the future of the country. So
That's
bring
right.
it back to the kids.
That's right. And Chuck, I think you started something for a future show. The courses, the sources and the forces. We should be thinking through solutions together. Absolutely. And I appreciate so much this show and our ability to express ourselves and to share ideas about how to make a difference.
Rebekah, David, thank you so much for your time, your thoughts, your perspectives, your insights. And let's indeed go ahead with more of this. Come back, rejoin us in a couple of weeks. Thanks for joining us on ThinkTech Hawaii. Aloha and best wishes.
Thank you so much for watching ThinkTech Hawaii. If you like what we do, please like us and click the subscribe button on YouTube and the follow button on Vimeo. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn, and donate to us at thinktechhawaii.com. Mahalo.